Hello and welcome to the Mindset and Self-Mastery Show. I'm your host, Nick McGowan, and on this show, my guests and I unpack the stories that shape us and the lives that we lead on our path to self-mastery. So, let's not wait any longer. Let the games begin. Hey, Matt. Welcome to the show, man. How you doing?
Hey, man. I'm doing all right, Nick. How are you doing?
I'm great. I'm excited to have you on. We've talked for a little while about getting you on the show, but now you're finally here, dude. So how does it feel to be on the show?
Yeah, man, it's good. I mean, like you said, we've been talking for months about this, and you know, I'm glad to be here. I'm glad you invited me on, and happy to share any of my journey. And if it helps somebody else, great. And if not, they can sit and point and laugh. You know, so that's the way I look at
it. Yeah, that's kind of smart. I'm sure there are people that listen to some of the shit that I say where they're like, "Oh, that was intelligent," and there are probably other people that are like, "What the fuck is wrong with that guy?" And that's fine. Hey, you can sit there, point, and laugh. That's totally cool. Well, man, I want to give a little bit of context here because you and I have a little bit of an interesting story in the sense that I think I reached out to you about some conference like years ago, just trying to sell. Honestly, you worked with a giant company. Can I name the name of the company? You cool with that?
Yeah, that's fine with me.
Yeah, totally good. So GE, I was going after GE and trying to figure out a way into it. You and I connected, and I think we just started shooting the shit about something through LinkedIn. And I was like, this dude is cool. Like, there are certain people I meet that are like, fuck you, you're a sales guy. I'm like, but you don't know who I am. Like, I'm a pretty good guy. Like, we should be friends. But you and I started talking and shooting the shit. And it was interesting a couple years later when you ended up leaving and moving on to the journey you're in now. So that's, I think, really where our friendship started to really turn into a friendship, talking through stuff and kind of going through it. So I'm jumping into your story now. Matt, it's your turn. So why don't you tell us what you do for a living and one thing that most people don't know about you that's kind of odd or a little weird?
Well, I got all kinds of odd and weird stuff. So what I do for a living now, so I've got two businesses that I started a couple months ago. One is DXM, which is Design and Experiential Marketing Solutions. And that's just based off of what I did at GE for the last 23 years. So I was a product designer and then got into the trade show and event world and hosting those kind of things. And so now my goal with DXM is to help smaller businesses achieve their goals in whether it's a conference, whether it's marketing, digital marketing, whatever, just kind of be a resource for them to really grow that experience. Because for me, the experience is everything, right? The experience is everything from how the phone is answered all the way to how you sell, what your storefront looks like, all of that. And then on the flip side, the other thing that I'm doing is my dad was a cabinet maker. He was a self-employed cabinet maker. And I grew up in a wood shop. I've always had a passion for furniture and making things out of wood and making things in general. And so I started Highland Timbers, which kind of came about through COVID. At the beginning of COVID, I've got two young children. I've got a almost 10-year-old and a 7-year-old. And, you know, I used to be on the road a lot, and suddenly we all found ourselves in the house together. And I came across this game called Crokinole. And I was like, yeah, that looks kind of interesting. It looks like a challenging thing to make, but it also looked like a fun game to play. And so I just went out to the wood shop one weekend and cobbled together this prototype of a Crokinole board. And Crokinole is a Canadian game. Think of curling, but on a tabletop surface. So a 30-inch diameter circle. You got these little round pucks, and you're flicking them into the hole, and you're in order for your opponent to score their puck, they have to touch one of your pucks that's on the board, and you go back and forth. And so I made this game, and I'm like, man, this is really fun. And my family loved it. The rest of our bubble, our COVID bubble, they enjoyed it. And I started making these games. And I was talking with my wife one day. I was like, I think there's really something here. I was like, this game's a lot of fun. It just has an awareness problem. And I said, what can I do to help raise that? So that's kind of one thing that's in my head. But then the other part of it was I got to make something. right? And I found that my joy comes in making things and being in the shop and kind of exploring that. And so as I started wrapping all of this into a bundle, I started thinking about, man, this is really about family. And this is about making those moments that matter, right? Because we're only going to go through this life one time. And we only have a certain period of time in order to do that. And, you know, a lot of us are in these arenas, we're in these workplaces, we're in these situations, whatever they are, and we're not able to give our best selves, right? And I'm now looking at this. This is a way for me to create a situation that I can put out my best self for my family and what I want to do and where I want them to be, and set an example, really, you know, for what they can do as they grow in and become contributing members of society and adults, right? So that's kind of how I look at that. You know, along the way, I've picked up some other games that I've made, horse racing games. So I got that out for Derby, and I've got some other games that are coming soon. So things that you didn't know about me, or you might not know about me. So there's a whole long list, but I'll just start. Since I gave you two businesses, I'll give you two. One, I am Santa Claus.
That you are, yes.
I portray Santa Claus in the holiday season. I get a big kick out of that with the kids. So that's a lot of fun for me. And then the other thing, which I think back on now, that I think probably spawned a little bit of Highland Timbers, where I'm at now with the woodworking and the game business, is I was a billiard mechanic. And you're like, what's a billiard mechanic? So a very good friend of mine growing up, his family had a pool table shop that made custom billiard tables and pool tables. And after I, learned a bunch of stuff from my dad and his cabinet shop, you know, as happens, fathers and sons have a falling out of sorts or whatever. They decide that they can't work together in whatever way. And, I took my tool bag and I went to my buddy, and he hired me, or his dad hired me to work in his shop. And so I spent evenings and weekends and summers in my high school years, and then on into college, building pool tables, and really, had a really good time doing that. Learned a lot about life. A couple of crazy guys that worked there, and just had a really good time. So those are probably the two things that are, PG enough rated that I can put them on here and go from there.
Oh yeah, well you have family that needs to listen to this, so I guess if there are things that your second family shouldn't know about, then maybe they shouldn't.
No, it's
clearly kidding, everybody. Clearly kidding. We joke. Man, that's good stuff. So yeah, when you said a pool table, basically what I heard was a pool doctor. I fix pool tables.
Yeah. No, I fix pool tables. We build and install pool tables, and it was really my first customer interaction, right? So when I was with my dad, he was the one who did all the face-to-face interactions with the customer. And, suddenly here I am, a teen guy going out with another guy to install pool tables in somebody's home. And, it was kind of the guy's name was Bob that I was mostly out there with, right? Bob usually handled most of the customer interaction, but there were a lot of times where I had to, right? Or Bob would, have to go, engineer something out in the truck, right? And I'd have to go talk with the customer and make sure that they, one, didn't walk out to the truck, but two, make sure everything was all right, and that they were being handled all right. And so that really kind of gave me a taste for, client interaction, customer interaction. So, and so I think that, that experience eventually kind of led me, gave me some of these background pieces to where I am now today. So.
Oh man, it makes total sense. And the fact that you were building this stuff with your dad, starting with that, and then going to another company that was still building things, It almost seems like it was sort of inevitable that you were going to get back to that. Like you were going to build things with your hands again.
Yeah, it really is. Because I mean, I even think about what I went to school for, right? I went to school to be an industrial designer. Now, I found that kind of a roundabout way. I actually started out as an architect, and I went to the University of Cincinnati to start in architecture. Mostly because I grew up in a fairly remote rural area of Ohio, and I was really one of the first ones in my family to go to college. So my parents had not been to college. Their experience with college admissions, all of that was pretty limited. My older sister went, but she's still in education. I mean, she became a dean and the whole bit, and she's super smart, and she really took the ball and ran with all of that on her own, right? I probably didn't run as far or as much with it as what I could, right? So, but basically what it came down to is my dad was a cabinet maker, and my mom was an artist. I've had my hands in both worlds, and my dad just looked at me and goes, "You're gonna be an architect," and I'm like, "Okay," so that was really my goal. And then I looked at, okay, where's the furthest point from home that I can get and still be in-state tuition? And so that led me to Cincinnati and University of Cincinnati, which happens to have an excellent architecture program and also a leading industrial design program. And so once I was there for architecture, I realized pretty quickly that this was not where I was meant to be, but I was in the right building. I just was in the wrong room. And so I started hunting around. I found industrial design, and I remember calling my old man and telling him, and so you're making a mistake. That's the biggest mistake of your life. And I said, maybe, but I said, you know what? Here's the thing. I'm paying for this, whether I'm paying for it now or I'm paying for it in student loans afterwards. It's my choice, right? And I'm making this decision because I think it's the right one. And I made the switch, and I had a great career in that. And a couple years after I'd been out, and I paid all my student loans off, and was living debt free. I remember my dad coming back to me. He goes, I remember telling you made a mistake. He goes, I was wrong. He goes, you did well. And so that meant a lot, right? So, but.
That's something I think we need to get into a bit without knowing who your dad is, and the audience has no idea any more than what you've already said. So if that meant a lot to you, I think for the most part, we all kind of experience that. Like no matter how we look at our parents or the respect level or lack of respect or whatever, I think we all at one point in time wanted them to affirm us and to be proud of us and be happy. There are certain parents that are just awesome at that. And there's some that are too much, where they're just too fucking much. But then there are others that don't say it enough and go, well, fucking, I love you. It's like, no, you don't, unless you actually say it and you do it. So in that moment, did you feel kind of a, yeah, fuck you, old man, I fucking told you? Or was it more of a, I'm glad?
There was probably a little bit of both.
Thank you for your honesty.
Yeah. Who doesn't like to be right? Right? We all like to be right. But at the same point in time, it's also humbling to see someone you care about come back to you and admit that they didn't know what was the best thing in that situation. And I think what's interesting is I remember talking with somebody one time, and I'm going to try not to butcher this quote, but basically they said, parents can only see how far you can fly by how far their wings have taken them. And, that kind of stuck with me. I was like, that's interesting, right? Is if their wings only took them to here, they can't see over that next horizon, right? So as I sit here and think through parenting and raising adults, right? Because I'm not, as my friend says, we're not raising children. If we were raising children, we'd be done already. We're raising adults. As I think through that, it's really about giving our children the proper tools so that they can make those decisions, and those great decisions that are right for them, that allow them to soar further than what we ever could on the wings we had, right? And so that's kind of how I try to think through these things as parenting, which, by the way, I mean, nobody gives you a book. I mean, all the books out there are bullshit. We're all just making it up as we go along. I mean, I don't care what anybody says.
I think that's just life in general.
Well, that's true too. But parenting especially. I mean, it's an interesting road for sure. So, but yeah.
I appreciate that. So I don't have kids, but I appreciate that perspective, because there are certain times where I've had conversations with my own parents where I'm like, look, Mom, sorry, I was an asshole. And here's why I was an asshole and how I've learned from that. There was also, there was a moment when I was younger that my dad called different milestones, and he straight up told me, this is what's going to happen at these things. And each of those has fucking happened. I expect that at some point I'll have kids. I hope at some point I have kids, and I hope that same thing happens, because I remember my dad telling me at 18, you're going to think I'm a fucking idiot, and I have no idea about anything. At 21, you're going to be like, old man's an idiot, but he might know a couple things. He's still an asshole, though. Fuck that guy. And then 25, you're going to be like, old man knows some things, man. But, you know, I'm invincible. I can do whatever the fuck I want. 30's going to roll around, and you're going to be like, yo, dude, I am sorry. I don't know all the things. I could really use your help. Every fucking milestone hit. I was like, yo, Pop, here I am, you know? And I think some of that comes from just saying, well, go out and do the things that you feel like you want to go do, and go do that. Like, I know from my perspective that he didn't try to hold me to where he was, because he was like, you can go do whatever the fuck you want. And it sounds like your dad realized after, like, hey, you can actually do that. So now with your kids, and you've got young kids, and understanding from that perspective that you're like, okay, I've gotten as far as I've gotten, and your journey's still going, but that you don't want to hold them back, because one of your kids could be, I don't know, the next Michael Jordan or anything, that you haven't gotten to that level. So how do you manage that with little kids and not, you know, like understanding their brains are still forming, you know?
Yeah. I mean, it's certainly tough, right? I mean, my wife and I talk a lot about tools, right? Making sure that we give the kids the right tools so that they can succeed in what they're doing. You know, something that came up this year. My daughter has dyslexia. My wife and I suspected it, but we weren't sure. And you know, we finally took her and got her tested. You know, COVID was kind of a weird thing. You know, they were at home learning, and we actually had hired a retired teacher to come in and work with both of our kids for that, because both my wife and I were, you know, full-time employed at that time, right, and just banging at it. And we had done the first 3 months, you know, when COVID first hit before summer, we did that swapping back and forth, and we both looked at each other at the end of that and realized we're not teachers for a reason. We're parents, you know, and so we went out and found a friend of ours who knew some retired teachers, and he recommended one, and she came in and she was great. She's been like a part of the family. And but anyhow, once the kids got back into school, my daughter, who's 7 now, who was 6 at the time, she started hating school, and, you know, just was really upset about it every day, and not being able to read and not being able to understand as much as what was going on. So we took her and got her tested, and sure enough, she came up being dyslexic, or having dyslexia. And you know, I remember talking with the gentleman about it, and there were several things I learned. One was that like 1 in 5 people exhibits some level of dyslexia. So that's 20% of the population, you know, is somewhere on this sliding scale. And then the other thing, he's like, well, he goes, on that sliding scale, you know, there are some people who the road's there, it just has some big potholes. There's some other people that, the road is there, but it's a gravel road. And some people, it's a wild trail going through the woods. He goes, now here's the good and the bad. He goes, your daughter's road hasn't even been carved out of the woods yet. He goes, and that sounds overwhelming, but she hasn't learned any of the bad habits yet that so many people with dyslexia pick up to try to get through some of these other things. He goes, so she's starting with a blank slate of really learning how best ways to learn for her with dyslexia. And so my wife and I talked, and there just so happens to be a school that specializes in, educating for folks with dyslexia and other learning specialties right at the end of our street. I mean, I can walk my daughter to school. I can go pick her up. And honestly, we didn't even know it was there. I mean, we knew the school was there, but we didn't know anything about it, right? We just knew it was a private school. And so, after very little deliberation, we both were just like, yep, she's gonna go to DePaul. And so we pulled her out of the public school and moved her right over there. And it's been great. It's been a great experience for her. They do a lot of things that I think would benefit all education personally. And I've kind of, you're catching me on my latest soapbox. So, if you don't like it, you can shut me down. But one of the things that I've been really questioning is the industrialized education process, right? And it really is geared towards, I don't want to say keeping everybody at one level, but it's, unless you're on the extremes, you're not really getting any extra help on anything, right? And so she was just kind of wallowing there, and it really made us think about some different things. And then with her new school, they also do compassion projects and some other things. And, my wife and I went to their compassion program, which happened to be right around Christmas time. I was like, man, that's really amazing, and each grade took something on. Her class took on sea turtles, right? They adopted sea turtles, and they made ornaments and raised money to be able to adopt sea turtles. And I was just like, man, that's pretty awesome. I'm here in Kentucky, so I don't know if you remember last October when the tornadoes came through down in western Kentucky, but the seventh graders, they pivoted. Man, I hate that word. But they had something else in mind, and that happened, and they were like, you know what? We need to raise money for the tornado victims, right? And so they changed their whole program to do that, and then the student council did that, and I just kind of looked at that whole program, and I was like, man, that's pretty amazing, right? What they're doing there, and I think it's a great education. Each individual student gets a personalized education plan, and it's a lot smaller classes. And I mean, honestly, I'd love to see that kind of model, be a lot broader. But I'd love to see teachers get paid what they're worth, because they're probably one of the, if not the most undervalued workforce people out there. They're certainly in the top ranks of it. I mean, so I think, that's kind of where I'm at, so.
Yeah. The education system is, it's an interesting topic to get into, because I think with COVID, that kind of started a little bit of an awakening for people with kids, without kids, just having conversations with themselves, or people that are fucking stuck in their house with them. Like, I have to look at you constantly now. And they have to look at themselves and have those conversations. And there's been a lot of conversations I've had kind of off air, shooting the shit with bourbon and talking about things and getting in where people have kids and all. So I'm glad that we're talking about this now, because I think the educational system in certain ways didn't really do us any good. It basically creates factory workers and says, well, you do these things because that's how you fucking do these things, and that's it. And I remember being a kid that would always ask why, and they'd be like, because you need to shut your mouth, that's why. I'm like, well, that doesn't fucking make any sense. And that whole Prussian system, I agree with you, needs to go away. We need to do something different with it. I'm hoping that there's some of that that's coming out of what has happened over the past year, 2 years. So even over the next 5, 10, 15 years, we should hopefully see something. But what do you think it would take to actually have change happen?
Well, I mean, that's a great question. What do I think it would take to make change in the education system? I do think that if there's one benefit to what happened with COVID is I think a lot of people became aware of this, right? And I mean that you look at that just in the workforce, right? Look at all of, and I don't want to use the word turmoil, but the upheaval, right, of people leaving jobs, you know, myself included. Other folks who, you know, didn't get choices to leave a job. You know, the workforce being servers and things like that, where they're not getting paid what they're worth to do what they're doing. You know, you look at all of that and it's like, okay, well, that industrial education process, that just geared people up towards the industrialized employment process later, right? And so now I'm thinking it's interesting, right? Because a lot of people, I think, woke up during COVID, and you know, I mean, there's been a huge surge in entrepreneurs and new business startups, and I'll be interested to see, you know, how that really translates in the education process as well, right? If there's that ability to change and shift. You know, another thing that I think is horribly missing, and it is the you know, the trade programs in school, right? Where when I grew up in high school, there were trade programs, and now there was a stigma against kind of those kids that got on the bus and went to the trade programs. Looking back now, I mean, there should be no stigma on those kids ever, right? I mean, those are the people that are out there building houses, putting electric in, plumbing, taking care of your sewers. I mean, all of those things that happen within those trade schools, taking care of your cars, right? All of that, those are the things that keep society rolling. And, you know, not every kid is going to be college material, and that's fine, right? I mean, my wife and I talk about all the time. I mean, we're okay if one of our kids decides not to go to college. I hope that they do, because I think it's a wonderful experience. But if they decide to go do something else, I just hope that we give them the tools that they need to be successful at whatever that is, right? You know, what is it going to take for that education system to change? I really don't know. I mean, it's all this stuff that's like just now sitting in my head, but I do sit there and think that it's broken and it needs fixing, you know. And I think about what it costs to go to college now these days. I mean, I remember writing, you know, I'm a little older, but I remember writing my first check for the first semester or first quarter of college, and it was like $732 for a quarter. And that was, you know, that was 19 credit hours. By the time I graduated, it was a whole lot more than that. And now, you know, about 9 years ago, a bunch of my college buddies, we all got together. The last one of us turned 40, and we got together in Cincinnati and went to a Reds game, and you know, got together and we went and hit all of our old bars that we used to go drinking at, and we were walking around campus, which University of Cincinnati campus is just blown up. I mean, the difference between what it is now versus what it was when we went to school there, it's unrecognizable. And we were like, for shits and giggles, I wonder what, you know, cost of education is now. And we looked it up, and it was like $45,000 a year. And we're like, oh, well, surely that's out-of-state tuition, you know? And then we were like looking at it like, oh no, that's in-state. I was like, how does anybody afford, to go to school? I mean, I went to school. I started. It took me a little while longer to get through school too, but I started out in architecture, which was a 6-year program. I then, halfway through the year, moved over to industrial design, which was a 5-year program. I still graduated in 6 years, so I took that first year and kind of did whatever I want. But, industrial design, I made it through in 5 years. But, I'm sitting there thinking, I'm like, 6 years. If you were 6 years now at $45,000 a year, that's over $240,000. How is that even sustainable for you to make the kind of money to be able to pay that back, right? Which then leads right back into that industrialized employment situation where I remember when I started at GE and there were all these old codger guys, that had been around the block. They were all old industrial designers and they were all getting ready to retire. And they all kept talking about, the golden handcuffs and all this. And I'm like, what are the golden handcuffs? I didn't really understand the golden handcuffs. And it's like, they're like, well, once you're in long enough, you understand that, you're just part of the grind but they got you, if you leave, you lose all these things. And I'm like, that doesn't make any sense to me, because I was like, in my head when I started, I was like, I was only going to be there, a year or two, and then I was going to move on. Of course, then it took 23 years for that to happen. But it's interesting when you think through that, right? It's like we're creating these automatons, right, in school and in employment and all of that. And it's like, I think now, with this surge of entrepreneurs and the ability that you have as an individual to go out and start something and be passionate about it, and that's starting at a younger and younger age, I think there's more ability for those kind of things to happen. And I'd like to see more of that focus happening in the school and the education system too. So,
yeah, it's interesting with the entrepreneurs that have come out of all COVID, because I think there's probably some people that are like, I fucking hate my job. I don't want to be here. I'm going to go do this thing. And a lot of those people are almost like the gym people that go to the gym in January. They're like, man, I swear I'm not going to be fat no more. And they get in there and they're in the gym for like a day or a couple days. I think there's still the character type that need to be able to take shit and you need to be able to deal with stuff that some people can't. And I bring that up because I think there's a certain level of running from problems that people just always do. Then the educational system doesn't really help us with that. The educational system has also produced the people that are educators. They were in the same system. So to be able to step outside of that takes us actually stepping outside of that and continuing education. And with all of the education all the information that's out there in the world, there's a lot. And there's a lot that can be too much for people. And I think some people get hooked on to what is like the easy thing because they're looking for that dopamine hit. Like, oh, well, COVID's here. I have to stay home. I fucking hate my job. I'm going to go do this thing. I'm going to go sell these things or I'm going to do whatever. I hope that was the thing that helped people get through. But I feel like for the most part, there are people that were just running from their problems with that. And I bring that up because you left GE. You were there for a long time, but you left in the middle of the pandemic, and you now have 2 businesses that you've started. But I know you're not one of those people. So talk to us about that process that you went through and the mindset that you had going, well, fuck, I got a wife and kids and I got to do these things.
Yeah. So, I mean, there were a lot of things that kind of led to it. One, I traveled a lot for my job. I mean, as you know, we spoke at the beginning. We met through a convention, right? And that's what I did. I was out on hitting the trade shows and doing events and all of that. So I was on the road anywhere between 30 and 40%, sometimes more of the year. And as my kids got older, I was a lot more unhappy with all of that. But I didn't really realize that. And there were some other things that happened within the work environment as well, but I don't really need to go into that. I mean, everybody's got work issues, right? And so I just kind of looked at it. I remember sitting, having dinner with the family, because all of a sudden, during COVID, we're all home. We're all home all the time. We're having dinner together every night. And I looked around. I'm like, man, I actually like these little kidlets that I helped make. Like this is fun. Like, I want to figure something out to be able to spend more time with them. And I think one of the other things that came out of all this is every year, I talk with my dad. I mean, I talk with him a lot more often than every year, but every year he'd be like, "Man, I can't believe you made it another year," right? And I'm like, "What do you mean?" He goes, "So before he was a home builder and got into cabinet making, he had been a Sears salesperson, and back then, that was a good job, right?" And he just was like, "You know what? After he was there for years, he realized that's just not the thing for you." And I remember him telling me, he goes, "Matt," he goes, we're not employees. We're owners. We're different kind of people. We do things differently. We do things the way we want to do them, or the way we expect it to be done." And I kept telling him, like, "Well, I said, Dad, I said, the reason why I've been able to do the things and been happy is I was able to run my shop the way I felt it needed to be run for a long time. And when that all kind of shifted and changed, I tried to mold into the new system, and then I just realized, like, this is just not working. It's not a good fit. And and so I made the decision that it was time to part ways and try something else. And I took time off. One of the things, I spoke with a lot of friends. Some of them retired, some of them varying ages, and they all said, "Hey, take some time. Figure out what you're going to do." And so I took time off, and I worked on our house. I've always been handy, and did a bunch of remodeling on our house, and redid my son's room, and really allowed me to clear my head, and it got me back to thinking, like, man, I really enjoy doing things with my hands. And but then I also feel like I've got all this other stuff going on in my head too, like the design and the marketing and all this experiential stuff. And it's like, how do I make sure I blend all this stuff together to make something? Because I want to be able to be a force for good out in the world, right? I want to be able to help people achieve their goals. And so that really is kind of where I started, with the DXM Solutions. I had a buddy who had moved to a new company. He reached out to me, and they had some new product introductions, and he needed some help with that because they were a company of engineers and manufacturing with no design sense, right? And so he's like, "Hey, Matt, I need your help," right? And so I helped them out with a project, and that's kind of led to some other things. And then, really I started looking at the games, and like, that's just fun, like, who doesn't like to play games, right? And so how do I get that out there? And so again, that's just in its infancy, and I'm just starting all that out. I partnered up with a guy who's got an industrial shop, and he's helping me run the parts, right? So there's, a lot of I started doing some of the stuff by hand, and there's a lot of CNC work by hand. It took, hours. What I was doing in hours, his machine can do in minutes. And it just made it so much more efficient and effective, for what we're doing. And so, that's kind of the route I'm taking that. And then, I'm also taking commissioned furniture pieces, right? And so I've been lucky enough to get some connections up with people that needed pieces and wanted something that was not something that they could get at a big box store. And, they really wanted a custom piece that was special to them. And so, that's kind of where I'm taking that, and, helping people improve their home life, right? In that way, one piece of furniture at a time. So, so that's kind of where it is. My goal is I want to make sure that I'm helping people create moments that matter, and that I'm giving them something that, they're going to pass on to their family, right? I look at so many of these pieces that I'm making, and it's like, hey, your kid, to steal a line off of another buddy of mine, like, your kids are going to fight over this piece, right? So what's it matter to you now if it's another, $100 or $1,000 or whatever the case may be, right? Your kids are going to remember this, and they're going to want it, at a later date. And so that's kind of how I keep thinking through things, right? So, but, and it allows me to be home.
That's cool. I keep hearing the word legacy.
Legacy, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it allows you to be home and allows you to actually build that legacy and spend that time with your kids. And honestly, man, it took you actually stepping out and saying, hold up, I don't know if this is right, and taking those steps. That's a big thing that a lot of people will think about, but they won't ever actually act on it. So is there any sort of advice you'd give somebody that was going through that sort of space and time just to be able to get them over that hump?
Yeah. Well, you always have to be a certain amount of self-reflective, right? When you look at things, and it's kind of like I think about this with my kids and the farmers market. So there's a farmers market up the street, right? And I grew up one generation off the farm, so I knew where food came from, and I wanted to make sure my kids knew where food came from, right? And so we started going to the farmers market, and befriended a farmer, and we unfortunately never made it out to his farm before COVID hit, and then he passed away. But kind of my intent was that we were going to get out there and kind of really see that. And I feel the same way about work, right? Going into COVID, our kids, all they knew was that mommy and daddy left the house in the morning. Mommy owned her own business, but they didn't really understand what that was. And daddy went to an office and would fly away on an airplane and come back. And what kind of legacy is that leaving them about work and work ethic, right? And so it really started making me think about what all of that is, and knowing that my wife, who started her law practice 10 years, almost 11 years ago, how happy she is and about what she's able to do and build with that. And I was sitting there going, man, I'm a grumpy old shit right now. Like, I want to make sure that I'm setting that same kind of example for our kids, right? So I want to make sure I'm producing something that they can see that work ethic and that passion, and know that they can do those things too, right? Because we were always telling our kids, you can do hard things. And that's the one thing I'd say to anybody. We can do hard things. We're only going around on this world, one life. That's it. And so we need to be able to do the things that we need to do to get through it, but we can do hard things and come out the other side. So that's my little bit of advice.
I appreciate that, and I think you've listened to the show too much, because you know that at the end of this I'm going to ask you, what's that one piece of advice you'd give somebody on your path to self-mastery, and you gave it before I asked the question, so thank you.
All right, well then the other bit of advice I'll give is you drink your bourbon neat. Drink your bourbon neat.
That's a solid piece of advice, man. That is good stuff. Well, dude, I appreciate you being on the show. It's always good to talk to you, and I'm glad that we're able to actually record this thing. Where can people connect with you? Where can they find the games?
Yeah, so I'm on Instagram, so you can find me there at Highland Timbers. Search that, and then you can also find me under Matrtr Jones Z with a Z at the end. That will also link up to my Instagram page. I've also got a Facebook page for Highland Timbers LLC, and that's it. Come find me there if you're interested in the game. DM me. I'd love to get some of that out and share those moments that matter with the rest of the world. So
that's awesome, man. Well, again, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Yeah. Hey, thanks, Nick. You take it easy.
Another great conversation on today's episode of the Mindset and Self-Mastery Show. So, what did you think of the show today? I'd love to hear your thoughts, and check out the Instagram or Facebook page to join the conversation. If you enjoyed the episode, please jump over to iTunes and subscribe, rate, and leave a 5-star review. It helps us be found and helps others be healed. If this episode opened your eyes, made you think, or smile at all, then I'm sure it'll do the same for your friends. Check out the show notes for more info from today's episode, and check out other episodes on the Mindset and Self-Mastery Show.com, as well as our YouTube channel. Just go to YouTube and look up the Mindset and Self-Mastery Show. And thanks again to our incredible guests for being real, honest, and vulnerable with us today. And I'd like to thank our sponsors, the Manly Club, and the Powerhouse Men Brotherhood. Men, do you consider yourself to be a powerhouse man? The criteria for becoming one is simple. Live with virtue and do good work. You see, a powerhouse man builds his life. He doesn't settle for it. He attacks mediocrity at the root, and that's exactly what we do in the Powerhouse Men Brotherhood. Visit powerhousemen.com. That's POWERHOUSE men.com. And most importantly, I'd like to thank you. Thank you for hanging out with us today. Your support means the world to us. And with that, remember, your mindset matters, and so do you.